Hello, my name is Kirioth, and today we are going to have a little chat about the fact that Marvel Comics and Games Workshop are collaborating to produce Warhammer Comics. Yeah, that's going to be a thing in autumn of next year, autumn of 2020, so about a year away, funnily enough. And I don't know. I don't know what to make of it at all. There's been some interesting reactions, I'll say that much. Some Yeah, Marvel seems to be really quite divisive amongst certain people, and I have to admit, not being a comics person, I don't tend to pay a huge amount of attention to what Marvel Comics does. Marvel Studios is, of course, the most ridiculously successful film producer of the last, decade or something, although everything's owned by Disney now anyway, I suppose, so that is probably got something to do with it. Oh, before we go any further, I'm going to say right now, not even a minute into this, I'm going to say right now, I will be very surprised if Disney buys Games Workshop, because that was one of the first things I read about this, and it made me laugh. When this broke, I think it was late last night, and I was just having a look, don't judge me, at some Facebook comments, because I feel like it's good to get a good spread of opinions. See what people are thinking, see what they're talking about, see what the general reaction is. I'm not convinced that this spells the end for Games Workshop. I'm not convinced that Disney will buy Games Workshop out, and this collaboration is in fact just a ploy for them to take Warhammer 40,000 and turn it into a child-friendly, rated U franchise for wee babbies. That seems to be slightly overreacting, to my mind, personally. I don't really see that happening. Now, of course, if it does happen, then I'll be quite happy to make a video when it does and say that I was wrong. But for now, I think it's probably just safe to assume that the collaboration will be exactly what they've said, which is comics. On a similar note, I'm also fairly convinced that this will not see the start of a Marvel Studios style series of Warhammer 40,000 films, the first one being Ultramarines versus Black Legion in 2 hours and 40 minutes of non-stop ridiculous action. That seems somewhat optimistic as opposed to pessimistic. Really, this has a lot of potential, but it has a lot of potential in all three ways. For me, there is the traditional viewpoint, the traditional thing of it's either going to be really good or it's going to be really terrible. That's it. There's no middle ground. There is no kind of acceptable or just okay. It's going to be great or it's going to be terrible. Nothing in between. I don't think that's fair. I think there is a certain level of mediocrity that can apply to all walks of life, and even to some of the most beloved things to do with Games Workshop and Warhammer 40k. I mean, look at the Horus Heresy series. There are some absolutely fantastic books in there. I mean, The First Heretic is one of my favourite books, just flat out, not even of the Horus Heresy, just in general, it's one of my favourite books. But in that very same series, there is Battle for the Abyss, which is a book that I did finish eventually. To say that never grabbed me is to I think understate it massively. I actively disliked reading that book. I did not see the point at all. It felt massively irrelevant. I didn't like any of the characters. I didn't like the situation they were in. I didn't see why it was happening in the first place. I just did not like that book. The two extremes for me are The First Heretic and Battle for the Abyss. Absolutely loved one and have read it over and over again. Couldn't understand why the other one was even written in the first place. But in between that, there is that leveling field of mediocrity whereby, good example for that from the Horus Heresy for me was The Outcast Dead. I didn't hate that book. Didn't mind it. I also didn't particularly like it either. It existed. It was a book that I read, and at the end of it, I had read that book, and that is the entire review. That's literally all I can muster about that particular novel. It exists, and it's a thing you can read. That's it. It is neither great nor bad, and that really, I think it's worth remembering that going into this partnership, because there could be an absolutely perfect storm here. if you got someone who has, a vast amount of experience writing comics, who knows 40k inside out, or at least has significant experience in writing 40k books, and they had that joint experience, and there is one, then you could end up with a genuinely excellent Warhammer comic. You could end up with something that suits the tone of the source material, that has the right setting, that has the right characters, that translates perfectly. Obviously, the art's going to have a lot to do with it as well, although, to be honest, I'm not too worried about that side of things, simply because Games Workshop is they're careful with their IP in certain respects. I know that many of you, upon hearing that, will go, you say that, but they license it out to anyone with access to app development on any device ever, which is why we have 8 million games and only 4 of them are good. But each of those games, they at least have to abide by certain appearances. You can't just go inventing stuff willy-nilly. You have to get approval from Games Workshop to do stuff that is not currently existing. You have to make sure that everything looks right, that everything represents their IP properly. Comics aren't going to be any different to that, so for the most part, the art side of things doesn't really bother me. I don't feel there's going to be any sort of issue there. You've got all this material in the background that tells you how this universe looks, and it's kind of hard to mess that up, I would hope. Anyway, if it is just some random writer from Marvel who gets given the keys to the vault, and it's a case of write a story out of who have we got lying around, let's find a random character, obviously that has potential to be absolutely god-awful. Likewise, I would suggest that if there's someone writing who is not familiar with how comics are written, because from what I understand, I don't write comics, but from what I understand, there is a slight difference in approach. There has to be. A novel and a short story and a comic are not the same medium. It's the same thing as film writing. It's not quite the same thing. The story might be the same, but the way you approach it has to be different, from what I've been told anyway. And if it's just someone who writes good 40k but has no clue how to approach comics, that could then have its own issues of either not being suitable at all and so it doesn't translate well, or it just ends up being a bit of a drag and doesn't become a complete product in a way. But then again, all of that being said, as I say, if you've got someone like, Dan Abnett, he already writes comic stuff. If he's involved in this, if the dude who did like Guardians of the Galaxy and Eisenhorn and Gaunt's Ghosts is brought on as like the lead on this sort of thing, how could that go wrong? How could that go wrong? I don't see how it could. All of this just feels so context dependent, and we don't have any additional context is the thing. It's easy to jump the gun and be like, it's going to be great, or it's going to be shit. But until we know who's writing the stuff, who is doing the art for it, how much like total experience with Games Workshop's property as a whole, the people making these have, it's literally just an announcement of, this is a thing that's going to happen. But that's it. That's all there is. This is one of those times where I feel like cautious optimism is the way forward. When it was the kids' adventure books for 40k, and for Age of Sigmar, that was just a wait and see. For me, that was it might be fine, might not be fine. It very much depends on how things go, but approaching it with just unbridled optimism didn't feel like the way forward. For this, to be honest, I think it's perfectly fine to maintain a bit of hope, to think to yourself, well, the best case scenario is this. And the best case scenario is that we have the perfect combination of a writer who understands, of an artist who has familiarity, of all of these things coming together to produce a really, really good end result. If you only have some of that, you could end up with something that's okay. I think it would actually take a bit of effort to make something that's absolutely terrible. But then again, it is possible. But this time round, I think I'm leaning more towards cautious optimism than anything else. I mean, to me, that would be the thing that made me go, okay, I'm pretty sure they're in safe hands. If it was Dan Abner, if he did just come out and say, yeah, I am working on this, I feel like that would be the point at which to go, yeah, this should be good. But then again, just gotta wait. Maintain that light level of hope, that light level of optimism, that feeling of, yeah, this could go okay. I think that's the way to approach this particular announcement. I mean, we're not going to see anything from it for like a year, so it's kind of, there's no point in getting like massively overexcited or massively pissed off now. You're not going to find out whether it's in any way a thing for another 12 months or something. So it's like, well, you could properly lose your marbles now and be like, this is going to be absolutely terrible. But you're not even going to know for quite a bit. So maybe keep it nice and level this time round. It's going to be interesting. At the very least, it's going to be interesting. Whether it's good or bad, there will be a level of curiosity there that I think will almost be unique to this particular matchup. So, yeah. It's just, so much is happening right now. So much is happening with Games Workshop and, like, other companies. We've had the Funko Pops, we've had the big, like, Space Marine action figure from Bandai. There's the partnership with Munchkin. The idea of it was the Eisenhorn TV show as well that's been floated. It's properly getting out there. It is properly getting out there. They are really making an effort to push out of the existing customer base and reach more people. As long as it's done well, and as long as there is consideration for what the settings are, it should be fine. And to be honest, for the stuff that we've seen so far for other endeavours similar to this or partnerships with other companies, I don't think there's actually been anything like god awful so far. I don't think there's anything that stood out as being like, oh, that was an absolute failure. I feel like for the most part, even if you're not interested in certain aspects, it's hardly been a bad idea. The Funko Pops being a good example of this. I mean, I don't care about those, but I wouldn't say they were a bad idea. Same thing with the action figure. Highly unlikely I'll get one because, well, I need to buy more Chaos Knights. But it looks pretty good. It looks like there's been a lot of effort put into it. It looks like if you collect that sort of thing, which, I mean, technically we do, but you know what I mean, it's hardly been an abject failure. And I think keeping all of that in mind is part of the reason why I'm approaching this with a cautious optimism, shall we say. Anyway, what do you reckon of this new collaborative partnership thingy between Marvel Comics and Warhammer? Are you excited? Do you think it'll be good? Do you have faith that it'll actually be quite the thing? Or are you in the camp of this is going to be terrible? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. In the meantime, feel free to click all the things, Patreon, video, subscribe, all that stuff. Click it if you like, don't if you don't want to. As always, there is an affiliate link in the description for Element Games. Doing something a bit different with that link from now on, just indefinitely, which is that any income from that link, we're going to take 10% of that at the end of every month, and we are going to give it to charity. So if you want to support the channel, then that's a good way to do it, because you get like 15 to 25% off whatever it is that you get, like 40k, Age of Sigmar, Bolt Action, X-Wing, War Machine, paints, brushes, tools, all of it. They have literally everything. It's a nice way to do it because you just pay a little bit less. I get something for sending you that way, and now whatever is made through that link, 10% of that we will donate to a charity at the end of the month. So we'll do a poll or something and work out which charity to give it to. So just thought it'd be a nice thing to do. I leave it to you, however, as to whether you click it or not. It's entirely up to you. Leave it in your hands. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Toodaloo.